In the dark recesses of London, a quiet killer lurked, his crimes hidden behind the mask of civility. Dennis Nilsen, a former police officer, became one of Britain's most infamous serial killers. His story is one of manipulation, control, and a twisted desire to recreate a fantasy in which he could hold power over others. This is Strawberry Ink, and today we delve into the mind of Dennis Nilsen, a man whose crimes shocked the world. Dennis Nilsen's childhood was far from normal. Born in 1945 in Scotland, he was raised by his strict, emotionally distanced mother, with whom he shared a complex relationship with. His father was absent, and Nilsen's experiences with love and affection were limited. By his own account, his earliest childhood memories were filled with loneliness and emotional neglect. These formative years set the stage for his later actions, but the true horror of his life didn't emerge until he was much older. After joining the police force in the late 1960s, Nilsen seemed like a model citizen on the outside. He became known for his diligent work ethic and was even promoted to sergeant. His interactions with people were cold and detached. His relationships never lasted. Nilsen found his sexual preferences developing in isolation, and by the 1970s, he was indulging in a hidden life of voyeurism and self-inflicted violence. It wasn't long before his fantasies escalated. Nilsen's desire to dominate others led to him luring young men into his home. He would charm them, offering food and shelter, before ultimately strangling them to death. But Nilsen's killing spree wasn't just about murder, it was about power, control, and possession. In his confession, Nilsen admitted to killing at least 12 men over a span of 5 years. His first victim, Stephen Holmes, was a young man whom Nilsen lured into his apartment. After they spent time drinking and talking, Nilsen strangled him, then bathed and dressed the body, keeping it in his apartment for days before disposing it. This bizarre ritual became a pattern. Nilsen would strangle his victims, then dress and pose their bodies, sometimes keeping them for months before discarding them. His acts of violence became more frequent and more brazen, but it wasn't until his second murder that Nilsen began to feel the consequences of his actions. In 1982, after Nilsen had claimed at least 6 victims, the smell of decomposing bodies in his flat grew too strong to ignore. His neighbors began to complain about the smell, and Nilsen, in a panic, began to dispose the bodies more carelessly. He boiled some of the remains, burned others, and flushed body parts down the toilet. It was this desperate attempt to cover his tracks that eventually led to his downfall. On February 9, 1983, police were called to Nilsen's flat after a witness reported a man acting suspiciously in the street. Upon entering the flat, they found it reeking of decay. Nilsen, with his calm demeanor, invited the officers in and even offered to help them search for the missing man. It wasn't until they discovered human remains in the drain pipe that the truth was revealed. Nilsen was arrested on the spot. As the investigation unfolded, Nilsen showed no remorse. At London's police station, he calmly confessed to the murders, though he claimed to have no memory of certain details. He also explained that his killings were acts of companionship. In his mind, he was not a killer, but a man seeking to create eternal bond with his victims. He spoke of his desire to have his victims return to life in some way, often keeping their bodies in his home for long periods of time, in the hopes that they would come back to life through his care. Nilsen spent that night at the station. The following day, he was brought to the Highgate Magistrates Court, where he appeared before Chief Magistrate Ronald John, who remanded him into custody to await trial. Prosecutor Alan Green charged Nilsen with 15 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Defense attorney Ivan Lawrence vowed to represent him, replacing Nilsen's initial attorney, solicitor Ronald Moss. Dennis Nilsen was initially detained at the London police station, but would then be booked into the HMP Brixton. Behind bars, he was psychiatrically evaluated and diagnosed with an unspecified personality disorder. Nilsen initially pleaded not guilty, but then entered an insanity plea, which is the reason why he changed attorneys. By the time Nilsen's trial began on October 24, 1983, the true scope of his depravity had come to light. His defense team argued that Nilsen suffered from a personality disorder, one that led him to commit these acts without understanding their criminality. But the prosecution countered with a clear argument. Nilsen knew exactly what he was doing. Psychiatrists were brought to testify. Dr. Paul Bowden, a forensic psychiatrist, stated that Nilsen was fully aware of his actions, and that his killings were deliberate, not impulsive. This assessment played a key role in Nilsen's conviction. On November 4, 1983, Dennis Nilsen was found guilty by a jury at the Old Bailey Courthouse of 6 murders and 1 attempted murder. Justice Croom Johnson sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years. He was then admitted into the HMP Wormwood Scrubs to serve his sentence, but would in December 1983 be transferred out of there after a fellow inmate named Albert Moffat attacked him with a razor blade. Moffat had been serving a 13-month sentence as a jury had convicted him of theft. He claimed Nilsen tried to prey on him and that the razor blade attack was done as a form of self-defense. Later on, another jury would believe that and find him not guilty. Dennis Nilsen was switched over to the HMP Parkhurst for the time being, following the attack. However, the system then officially assigned him to another prison, the HMP Wakefield. He appealed his case, but his request for a new trial or exoneration was denied. At the Wakefield, Nilsen would receive threats from other inmates, so it was time to move him to another facility. This time, he was placed into another temporary prison, the HMP Full Sutton, remaining there until being transferred to the HMP Whitemoor in 1993. In December 1994, it was time to determine whether Nilsen would be released when completing his first 25 years of incarceration. Home Secretary Michael Howard denied this decision, ensuring that Dennis Nilsen would spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2003, once the 25 minimum was up, he was returned to the Full Sutton facility, his very last home in this world. The Globe had finally seen the monster behind the mask, but even behind bars, Nilsen's journey was far from over. In prison, Nilsen continued to express no remorse for his crimes. He lived in relative isolation, finding solace in writing and music. He composed music, wrote his autobiography, and even began translating books into Braille. But Nilsen's obsession with his past never left him. In his writings, he detailed the killings, the fantasies that drove him, and the twisted pleasure he derived from his actions. For years, Nilsen lived out his days in prison, cut off from the world and from any form of human connection. On May 10, 2018, he began complaining about severe stomach pains and was taken to the York Hospital, where his body was examined. Nilsen's abdomen had ruptured. he was diagnosed with an aortic aneurysm. This damage was repaired with surgery, which led him to suffer a blood clot from complications. 2 days later, Dennis Nilsen died at the hospital. His cause of death was established as pulmonary embolism, retroperitoneal hemorrhage. In June 2018, his funeral was held at his last prison. No family came, only 3 prison officers, a faculty member, and one of his fellow inmates attended. He was afterwards cremated, and the ashes were given to his family. Dennis Nilsen had finally been forgotten by the world, but his legacy lived on in the chilling accounts of his murders. Dennis Nilsen's story is a reminder of the darkness that can exist in the most unsuspecting of people. His crimes, rooted in a desperate need for control and companionship, left a trail of devastation. But Nilsen is not the only one. His case stands as a testament to the hidden monsters that can lurk in the shadows, blending in until it's too late. This has been Strawberry Ink. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes as we continue to explore the darkest corners of human nature. Till next time, have a good rest of your day.